Hello, Vagina. Cheers to being a woman, but womanhood, it's a jungle down there. Get ready to be real, raw, and totally uncensored as we explore the depths of health, sex, motherhood, and relationships. Strap in for those topics that make you cringe, make you blush, and make you want to hide your face. Welcome to the Hello Vagina podcast. Hello and welcome back to the Hello Vagina podcast. With me today, I have special guest, Krissy Ropiha. She is a mum of three, a certified nutrition coach with a background in psychology, author of 2 recipe books, and creator of Mealtime Success online programs for 0 to 6s. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
So today we are going to talk about breastfeeding and sort of everything involved in that, because it's really a huge area and a lot to discuss. So can you tell me about your journey being a mum of 3 with breastfeeding?
I sure can. It's been interesting each time. I think each time there's been perhaps different complexities that have come into play. And as a new mum, so my oldest is now 6, and I'm definitely going to share my age here because I was 25 when I had him. So I don't recall there being like a lot of breastfeeding that I was exposed to prior to that. I was one of the first in my friend group to have a baby, so it wasn't something I was like naturally exposed to. Like breastfeeding was kind of new to me and to like my environment as well. So I think that I don't know whether it was naivety, a little bit of naivety, which perhaps was a good thing at the time, but I really didn't have any solid expectations as to what was going to happen. Other than that, I really wanted to breastfeed, and that I just kind of, I guess, had my son, and then I thought, yep, it'll just be super easy and it'll just, you just breastfeed, like that's just what happens.
Yeah.
But unfortunately for him, he had a really good birth, but he needed to go into a special care nursery for the first short period of time after his birth. Mm-hmm. And that meant that I wasn't able to breastfeed straight away, as they currently recommend in hospitals. And I still remember sitting in the special care nursery doing my first feed. I didn't know how to hold him. I didn't know how to latch him. I had no idea what I was doing. And one of the nurses came over, and she was a little bit like kind of abrupt, but she was like, this is how you do it. You're doing it wrong, but this is how you do it. You need to hold here. But I'm actually very thankful that she was very hands-on. So she was very, very hands-on and very involved, because if she had not have done that, I actually don't know if I would have known how to hold my baby to feed. Yeah. And it's something so simple that had made such a big difference to that starting journey. Some of the other things that I remember right at the start, particularly the first time, is I remember when we first got home, it was day 4. So those blues were kicking in. My mum was here, and I still remember walking up and down the hallway. He was screaming. He would not latch onto me. And I just remember that feeling of, I'm your mum and I can't soothe you and I can't feed you right now. I was so engorged, and I thought, what am I doing wrong? Like, I meant to be your mum. I meant to be able to comfort you, and I couldn't. Like, it was one of those moments where, and then my mum took him and he settled instantly, which made me even more upset, because I was like, I can't even do my one job as a mum, which is to feed you and comfort you. Yeah. And I think now that I've had 3 kids, I think just knowing that that's all normal, like it's all just part of that journey. And every single stage, particularly in those early moments, they all are there to serve a purpose. Your milk comes in, or whatever it might be. Your baby, you and your baby are just still learning how to connect with one another. Had I have known that the first time, I just think that I would have, I don't know, given myself even a little bit of leeway in those first few moments.
Yeah.
It's just, I think sometimes it's just like the naivety can be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing, in that you can just feel like you're failing as, doing the one job you're meant to be able to do as a mum, as a new mum.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot that you're sort of not told before you have a baby about breastfeeding. You go through these antenatal classes that really sort of prep you for birth, but they don't really go into detail about breastfeeding, and you're not sort of told what to expect. Or like you said, that head hold position, I've heard from a lot of women tell me, that the nurses come in and they're like grabbing your boob and they're grabbing the baby, which is confronting for a lot of people. Like, obviously for you, it was helpful because you don't know, and it's not something that you're taught in antenatal classes, and
exactly,
it's not actually as straightforward as boob in mouth. And I think that's what we sort of like you said, naively, we just expect that that's how breastfeeding works. Like, baby puts mouth on boob and baby gets fed. And it's actually a lot more complex than that for a lot of women. So did you find that you had a lot easier time with your second too?
She was an interesting one, and perhaps I'll touch on her after, but I guess when it comes to my third, I had so much more awareness that things would be tricky in the start. And I think even the simple things, and some of the messages that come through to me from other mums, because a lot of mums that have connected with me have had babies around the same time as my youngest. And so many of the messages were, I've been sitting in my baby's room for, up to 2 hours plus, feeding. They won't stop feeding. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And I think third time around, I was like, this is so normal. They're cluster feeding. They're trying to, increase the milk supply. They're comforting. There's so many reasons why that happens. And I think knowing that this time, I just prepared myself better. I had snacks, I had water, and I sat in the room knowing that I could be in there for a couple of hours. And that simple fact of just knowing that it might not be a quick half an hour feed, although a quick half an hour feed for me. But you know what I mean? Like, it might not be that quick feed. It might be that my baby needs me and I'm going to be in here for a couple of hours, and then accepting that, because that made such a big difference this time, both to the way that I prepared. So going and knowing, I needed a snack and I needed some water, but also just my mental awareness of what I needed to do in that stage. When it came to my daughter, so my daughter was my second baby, I actually had a quite challenging feeding journey with her, but for very different reasons. And that was that she had an intolerance to cow's milk, which was detected through my breast milk. So she was reflux. She just would not settle for more than 10 minutes at a time. And the first 6 weeks with her were incredibly challenging. Not to mention my husband at the time also worked away in the mines. He was away for 4 weeks at a time. So I think that added the complexities, because I was the only person that was there for her. But those first 6 weeks until we found out what was contributing to this unsettled reflux, colic type symptoms were really challenging. And I, again, wish I had known, and you don't know until you experience these things. But I just think that if I had been aware sooner, and I'm so grateful we found out at 6 weeks, because I know so many people experience this for such a long time, and these symptoms can be a result of so many different things, and it can be really hard to explore them, but also for practitioners to hear you. I think for me, I felt so I immediately, like, the first thing I did, and this is what I say to anyone, start a food and mood diary and see if you can work out, if you can see a pattern, because then you can take it along to your healthcare provider and say, look, I, as a mum, am really worried. I feel like something's not quite right here. This is what I'm seeing. Versus going along and saying something's wrong, I don't know what it is, I have no idea. Because I think sometimes, in those short visits, we're only seeing pediatricians or doctors for such a short period of time, that it can be really hard to hear information or just to feel heard as a mum as well. Because you know your baby best, and if something's not quite right. And it can be even hard just to find the right help as well, like the right person to help and support you through that. So, I definitely think that I felt really confident at that time to say, this is what I think it is. This is, I think it's dairy. This is why. This is what I'm seeing. And they were really open to hearing that and really supportive in terms of helping us navigate that. So, yeah, I think it was definitely down to following those instincts and then just, finding the right person to hear what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
So, yeah, once we found that out, her journey completely changed. And I think that had that not happened, I don't even know if I would have breastfed for as long as I did with her. But we ended up having a beautiful breastfeeding relationship despite that first 6 weeks being so challenging. So, yeah, I think it's sometimes there's more to the picture. And when it comes to breastfeeding, yeah, there's so much more to it than just a simple putting your baby to your boob and hoping for the best. So,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I think about too, in a lot of things, we're just told that things are normal because they're common. And I think this is a big thing in so many areas as a woman, where we get told that things are normal because they are common, but they're not, so a baby that does have a lot of reflux, you can very easily get flogged off and told, oh, that's just, that's normal. That's normal. Yeah. Plenty of babies get that. But if you feel like it's more than newborns vomit a lot, they feed and they vomit. Like it is sort of normal from that aspect, but they're not settling and they're clearly in pain after feeding, that there is actually a bit more to it. And I think realizing that intolerances are there is sort of something that's a bit newer than maybe our parents' generation of when they had us. They probably weren't looking at food eliminations from that. They would have just said, like, obviously, try formula, and then, formula does that food elimination for you essentially and fixes the problem for some people. So it is interesting that you mentioned the intolerances, because it can actually be a matter of doing different food eliminations, and there's just something that they're intolerant to that you're consuming. It can change your whole journey for you and actually turn it back around and allow you to maintain breastfeeding rather than having to switch to formula.
Absolutely. And it was interesting actually when we spoke to both my mum and my husband's mum, that both of us, so both myself and my husband, they were like, oh yeah, you guys didn't have cow's milk when you were little, like when you were newborns, you had goat's milk, like a goat's milk formula. And I was like, well, this would have been nice to know. Yeah. This would have been handy to know.
Oh, okay, we were intolerant too. Good.
But I think just not even having those conversations, like I think like you said prior to us coming on here, just those conversations just don't always happen naturally, and sometimes it's just simply having the conversation and then going, oh yeah, me too, like that's what we experienced too, and then it kind of helps you go, oh okay, like one, I'm not alone, and two, this kind of makes sense now. So yeah, I think having those conversations was helpful, perhaps would have been helpful beforehand as well. And it brings, I guess, another topic in, which is foods that can be really challenging for newborns when you are breastfeeding. And I think there's so much controversy or discussion about this because the research is really, there's no clear research, and this is the same with starting solids as well. And that's why there's so many big discussions about it, I think, because the research is just not clear. And but what you'll hear from, so many whether it's midwives, child health nurses, people who are really big in that breastfeeding space, is that there do tend to be foods that can upset babies, especially in the first 12 to 16 weeks. Whereas after that, they become much more able to handle those foods. And look, whether it's supported by research or not, but if you see it in your baby, it's always worth exploring. I still remember, and I think I'm so grateful that I had this experience when I had my first son. I went and saw like a midwife, where you followed up for 6 weeks afterwards. And she simply said, look, just be wary of things like citrus and tomatoes. And I didn't think too much of it. But I had come to her and I was like, he's having almost his bowel movements are insane. And she was like, what are you having? And I was like, oh, I'm drinking orange juice. She was like, yeah, you might want to slow down on that. But it's things like you don't know, and you don't realize that when you're breastfeeding, certainly from my perspective, I didn't realize, you think while you're pregnant, there's so many things you're not meant to have. And then you're like, oh, well, I'm breastfeeding now, it's fine. Whereas I think it's just as important and if not more important, that you are nourishing your body as well, because you are providing so much to your little one. Your body is having to do so much work in order to even make milk. But yeah, I think it's just it's another interesting topic, I think, around the foods that may then impact your little one, to see those things like colic or reflux. It's another really interesting topic, I think.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, nutrition for mum is really important, you know, making sure that you are having enough calories to sufficiently make breast milk. They've sort of picked a standard number of 500 calories, which is sort of random considering everybody's metabolism is very different and everybody is completely different sizes. So 500 as a blanket number is a really random number that they've picked. But I guess it's to put you on the safer side, to make sure that you are eating enough, because your body needs to now produce breast milk that it didn't have to do before. And depending on the demands of your baby and how much you need to be producing, you know, it's extra energy that your body requires. So making sure that you are fueling your body in a good way is definitely going to show those benefits.
Yeah, I think it's a hard space as well, because I think so many mums experience, and myself, like, you know, I'm speaking so many mums, but I'm really just reflecting on my own journey, that it can be really hard as well, because postpartum, your body's so different, and you have perhaps this expectation, whether it's put on you from social media or from what you see or what you hear, that you need to get back to a pre-baby body or a pre-baby size, and therefore you need to undereat, or you need to, you know, whatever it is. During this crucial time, if you're breastfeeding, where your body needs so much, your body is using so much, and if you're not eating what you need, your body's going to start taking those minerals from your bones, say for example calcium, and your health is going to suffer. Your baby's still going to get what they need. Your milk supply may decrease, but you're the one that's going to suffer in terms of your own health and well-being. So I think it's important to remember, and, you know, if you are a breastfeeding mum, that whilst I completely understand and I completely relate to those feelings of wanting to feel as though you're your pre-baby self and you want to have the energy, that weight loss isn't necessarily the goal here, but rather, you know, feeling healthy and being able to keep up with the demands of your new life. So yeah, I think it's an important topic. I think it's not spoken about enough, and I think there's so many pressures, or society pressures, or you go on Instagram and you see, you know, 5 days postpartum, this is me, and everybody's so different. Like I guess for me too, like I'm very mindful that I'm a petite person, which is why I haven't shared a lot of my like post-baby body on social media, because I'm so aware that that's such a big trigger for so many women. And my body's not your body, and your body's not my body, and I think we just need to remember that and be kind to ourselves during this period, particularly if we're feeding our babies.
And there is definitely, it's a small percentage of people that snap back, so to speak. It's not the vast majority of people. And obviously, I'm sure a lot of these people wouldn't have shared their snap back if they hadn't have so much snapped back. But it is actually the minority of people that does happen for. And it also depends on what kind of journey you had leading up to delivery as well. Like, you know, did you actually consume a lot more than what your body required, and you actually put on fat? You know, you're not eating for two throughout pregnancy, and the calorie intake that you do need is nowhere near eating for two. So if you sort of did do that, you know, eat for two where you were over consuming, you weren't just growing a baby, you know, you were putting on weight. So obviously when the baby comes out, it wasn't all baby. So there's going to be, you know, your ability to snap back is not the same as somebody that just had enough and it was mostly baby. You know, how much water you retain if you were holding a lot of water. So there's so many parts that go to it. But I think for a lot of women, they need to remember, like, it took you 9 months to get that way. So take the time to work back from that. Like, you didn't become that way overnight. It wasn't just like you clicked your fingers, you went to sleep one night and you woke up the next day with this totally new body. Like, it took you 9 months. You grew this amazing human that's now in your arms. And there is no rush. It's about, you know, nourishing yourself, nourishing your baby, and taking that time to bond with them, because that's really where your focus needs to be early on. Not in this, what your body looks like, because we can change it. You can make that body better and stronger than it was pre-baby, but in that at the beginning, it definitely shouldn't be your main focus. So you touched slightly on before introduction of solids and sort of how and when. I guess there's a lot of confusion and controversy around when the right time is to start introducing foods, and I guess the types of foods too. I was listening to one of our mums mention something about their gut health and rice cereal not being the best first food for them.
Yeah, it's such an interesting topic, and I think it's also one that comes with a lot of judgment. And as someone in that space, and I'm working with mums every single day who are asking, or who are in that time where they're looking at introducing foods, and I hear that. I hear the judgment. I hear the criticism from others. I hear that they're getting 10 different opinions or recommendations, not just from friends or family, but from health professionals as well. And the reason we see this is because the research is reflective of this. The research is, it's completely changing, it's ever changing, it's frequently changing, and it can be really hard to know what the right thing to do is right now. And what the right thing to do is right now can change, from 5 years ago, from 10 years ago. I think to answer your question, we know now that gut health is really important for all ages. And what we don't know is a lot about the baby's gut. So I think it's that learning space where we're learning more, we're hearing more, we're understanding more. But basically when it comes down to introducing solids, we have a set of recommendations from the World Health Organization that most countries then implement or adopt. So for the current recommendations, basically they are a baby needs to be older than 4 months, but around 6 months. That's like the current phrase. And even that phrase, that simple phrase of around 6 months, can have so much interpretation. We know also that the allergy, like the current allergy recommendations, are to introduce these, the top 8 allergens, basically immediately. Like, there's no reason to delay those right now. But then again, some of that contradicts the around 6 month age, because sometimes some of them are recommended to be introduced earlier than that. So this is why it's so confusing. This is why there's so many complexities, is because the research is, I guess, still emerging in this space. And the best we can do as a mum is listen to the current research, do our best at the time, and continue to be open to hearing the research and the information in that space. I think a lot of the complexities at the moment again are around what do we introduce, like you said about the rice cereal. And I think the reason why rice cereal is pushed so much is because it's a natural source, like it's a fortified source of iron, and one of the first foods that a baby needs. Their stores of iron naturally decrease over time. So by around 6 months, depending on whether your child was born early or not, their iron stores deplete, so they need iron through their food. And that's why the iron fortified rice cereal is one of the first foods that people have. But it's not necessarily the only source of iron. And I think once you understand that and you know that there's other sources of iron, you can then explore other options. So there's other options that are whole food options. Things like fruits and vegetables are often more it's difficult because every baby's different, and some babies have a hard time digesting different foods. It could be tricky to say that this is the exact best food that you should start your baby on, and this is the order that you should serve foods to your baby, because we don't know that information yet. So I guess when it comes to introducing babies to food, the best thing you can do is introduce one at a time, slowly. There's no rush, and know that it's okay if your baby only takes 1 to 2 teaspoons those first few weeks. That's okay. That's actually really normal. Because a lot of mums then go, oh, well, my neighbour down the road has just introduced their baby to solids, and their baby immediately took to them and is taking, plenty of food, 3 meals a day, and my baby's sitting here refusing to even open their mouth. And things like that can be really hard, because I think, we have all these expectations, and again, it's one where we don't talk about it enough, and if we do, there's so much judgment that comes alongside it. So knowing what's common and normal is helpful in this situation, because like you said earlier, what's common and what's normal can be very different as well. But I think this is a topic that you can go into so much depth with, and certainly I'm not an expert in terms of the specific foods you should be introducing, because we don't know that just yet.
Yeah.
What we do know is that there's a really good array of foods, that the research doesn't encourage us to avoid foods other than honey under the age of 1. And you can also do everything as per the recommendations and still, like, I have a baby with an allergy. So, you know, it's one of those things where you can do everything under that's currently recommended, and you can still end up having a child who has an allergy, or you can still face challenges along that journey. So
it's just about sort of introducing one thing at a time, just to make sure that they aren't getting an allergy to anything, introducing those, but sort of understanding that some babies are staring for food of their siblings at, 4.5 months, and others at 6 months are still not interested. And that's normal.
Exactly. And even I can compare the differences for my firstborn versus my most recent little one, where I introduced solids basically at 4 months for my firstborn, and he really struggled. It was really tough on his digestion, and I actually stopped and then started again. And I think, every baby is so different, and we just need to be able to recognize how our baby's responding to food. We need to know the signs that indicate that they've had enough. So when they're clamping their mouth shut, they're turning their head, they're kind of, you can still be, and this comes back to another topic around, should you spoon feed, should you do traditional baby weaning, or should you do baby-led weaning where you're letting your baby feed themselves? And again, I think there's such amazing research in the space that's emerging. But again, we don't have the perfect answer, because I think a lot of the times baby temperament is just something that you need to consider as well. And you can also be baby guided if you're serving a spoon or helping your baby as well. It's just simply looking out for things like if they are turning their head away, if they're clamping their mouth shut, and listening to those signs and watching for those cues. So you can still be baby guided and do that. It's another big topic with a lot of judgment, a lot of conversation, a lot of controversy around.
But there's some good cues to look out for if you are starting to introduce solids, obviously, because they can't tell you that they want more or that they're full, but to look for those signs that they're disinterested in food, and know that if you've only fed them 2 spoonfuls, that's completely fine.
Absolutely.
So how did you go in terms of, maintaining breastfeeding as you're going through introduction of solids, and how long do you breastfeed for? I think that's a good one that has so much judgment. Your baby turned 1, what do you mean you're still breastfeeding them? Like, I've definitely heard that one from mothers, family, friends. Everybody feels like they've got the right to give you the opinion, like, what do you mean your baby is 1 year and 1 day, why are they still on the boob?
I love that one. And this journey that I'm currently on with my little one, who is over 1 now, and I'm still feeding him, yes. And this is the first time or the longest time I've fed for. And I think it's such an interesting one. There's so many complexities that go into the length of time that you choose to feed for. And interestingly, despite it being such a controversial topic, and despite there being so much judgment for extended breastfeeding, World Health Organization recommends we breastfeed until 2. So I think just reminding ourselves of that before we make comments about other people's breastfeeding journeys. There's also so many reasons as to why we breastfeed. For me, I just think I still feed my son to sleep. So, even just that simple fact that it's comfort for him. If he hurts himself, he jammed his finger in the door the other day, the first, my immediate reaction was feed him to soothe him. So there's so many reasons why we breastfeed, and it's not just simply down to nutrition. And I think knowing that, and I don't know, I do wish it was a conversation that didn't have, hold so much judgment in it, particularly for extended breastfeeding, because it's one where I'm entering into this new territory as a mum myself. And I feel like because it's a conversation that can be tricky to talk about, there's not as much information around, which makes it really hard as a mum. You're going, how often should I be feeding, and should I be offering this alongside this? And, it's just one where I just don't think there's enough conversation around that extended space. So you do feel a little bit alone, or you feel a little bit isolated in that space.
Yeah. No, I think definitely, because it is, you know, a lot of people where, however along the line it decided that one was the sort of cutoff, the normal, again, the common, not normal, the common cutoff point. Because I think that's it. I don't think there is a normal to a breastfeeding journey. If one is a common cutoff number, then it is that, but it's not normal. But like, as you said, because people aren't talking about breastfeeding after one.
Exactly. And I think, you know, I've personally noticed it more recently because I've always been like, I'm really comfortable at feeding in public. This is my first son where I wore a cover almost every single time. But I've noticed recently when I feed my son who's over 1 now in public, I'm like, oh, is that person looking at me? Like, does this look weird because he's a little bit older and he's walking? I don't know. Like, it's one of those things where I'm just aware that I'm more aware of it. So yeah, and I think it's just down to that unspoken conversation, or that perhaps the judgment that we know is there because we've heard it from other women as well. And the fact that it's not talked about often. You can kind of go into it with those feelings of, even if you're not being judged, even if no one really cares, you can still feel like you are, because it's just not spoken about as much.
Yeah. And I think the thing is too, there's probably a lot of women that are doing it. I guess one is sort of when you finish your maternity leave and you go back to work, so you're not sort of feeding as much anymore. But what you do when your child wakes up in the morning and what you do when you put them to bed at night is something that nobody sees. So if you're not necessarily feeding throughout the day and you're just down to sort of a morning cuddle, and that it's more of a comfort thing than an actual nutrition. So there's probably a lot of people that are actually feeding longer than what they tell people too. Like, are we just saying that we've finished, but secretly at home that's not what's happening? Because there is that stigma of, you know, they're too old to be being breastfed. And I think we have that sort of image in our head of 5-year-olds. But like you said, two is an interesting number from the World Health Organization. It's definitely not something that is, I guess, common knowledge. Like,
and
age.
I mean, within Australia, the recommendation is 1 or beyond. So again, it's really open to interpretation. But it actually brings it to a conversation where with Luca, when I did return to work, and I returned to work a little bit earlier than, I think he was around 1, but I started looking into daycares. And obviously, you know, at that point I was like, well, if he's at daycare, I can't like feed him during the day, so I need to explore expressing. And I still remember going into the centre and going, here's my express breast milk, like what do I do with it? Because everyone else had to have formula bottles made up. And I still remember them going, oh yeah, no one really does expressed milk here. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I must do formula then. Like, that just must be what I do. Like, and I just think now, like, I think that was such an interesting conversation to have, because I didn't know I was this was my first time experiencing this. And just that really matter of fact, like, no one has expressed breast milk here, you just have formula, kind of just threw me. And I was like, okay, well, that must just be what I do. So again, I think it comes down to society expectations and, if you want to do that, like standing your ground and going, well, no, this is what I'm doing and this is what I feel comfortable with.
Doesn't really matter what's in my bottle.
Yeah.
Like, as long as it feeds my child.
This is what you feed my baby.
It's not chocolate milk, it's fine. I think it's interesting for a lot of women the first time and don't have a lot of experience being around babies. I think we sort of just associate formula with bottles, and therefore once you switch over to bottles, you put formula in it. And I think that for a lot of women, they probably don't think that they so much have the choice of exclusively expressing that. And there's actually, I didn't realize until recently, I came across that you can actually donate your formula. I was like, your formula, your breast milk.
Yeah.
I was like, that's amazing that you can actually share that nutritional value in that with others. I think you sort of associate it with being yours. You know, it's my breast milk. It came from my breast. It's just for my child. Like, you don't sort of think about the fact that you can actually share it.
I think it's an interesting topic, isn't it? Because I feel like it's funny how we think it's maybe more weird to offer a baby another mum's breast milk, yet we happily offer a variety of cows to our babies. Like, you know, it could be like 5, 10, a million. You know, we don't know how many cows are being offered to our baby, yet just one different mum. I don't know, it's an interesting conversation again, because there's
I think because we, you know, I guess boobs are still very sexualized, and they've somehow along the line become this sexual organ not looked at as, you know, a normal feeding tool. Like essentially we have breasts not to be sexual, but to feed babies. Like that's biologically why women have breasts. Otherwise they'd be the same as men. It's funny that it's sort of breastfeeding has become this taboo subject because it's a boob. Therefore we don't talk about boobs. And it has so many effects for women because we don't know these things about breastfeeding. We're not talking about breastfeeding. Nobody tells you in advance. Nobody tells you that you might have problems feeding. No one tells you might have latching problems. No one tells you that, you know, mastitis. I think that's, I'm not sure if that's something that you'd had at all, but it's really common. And I think a lot of women don't know what it is until they've got this rock hard, incredibly sore breast and they're like, and they feel like they're going to die because they've got this raging infection in their body and they're like, what is wrong with me? Because we're never sort of told about it.
Yeah. And I still remember the first time I went to my doctor and said, the second time actually, sorry, I went to my doctor and I said, I think I've got mastitis again. I've got all the same symptoms. I really don't want it to get to the point last time where I felt like I had the full blown flu and I thought I was, you know, this is it. Like I'm not going to be able to keep feeding my little baby. And it was so interesting to hear his response to this. And I was so like, I had like such a proud moment of this is what we're hearing from a doctor who is a male as well, because his response was, look, if you're telling me that this is your symptoms, I believe you. Because you're the mum and you're the one that knows your body and what your body's doing. And I was like, oh my goodness, like you're amazing.
Yeah.
To hear this from a medical practitioner who's putting so much trust into a mum who knows their body say, I hear you. I was like, oh, this is what we want to hear. And this is what we want to see more of is, you know, practitioners really listening to mums when they say something's not quite right. And whether it's mastitis or whether it's something else, I just think being able to hear and listen and feel heard as a mum, I think is so important and so important for our baby's outcomes, because if we don't feel heard, then we don't look at exploring other options, or we don't look at feeling like something's not right, something's not going right for us. And so like you said, we could just end our journey with breastfeeding because we don't feel heard. And then, you know, the formula is the option that we then have to go to because we don't feel heard.
Are there some resources that you'd recommend for mums that you found helpful?
I think one of the best things actually that I ever had an opportunity to have was I spoke to, and this was not my suggestion, but rather the midwife I first saw with my son, was she linked me up with another breastfeeding mum. And I still am so grateful to this day because I was able to text that mum, and I'd never met her before. I didn't know who she was, but being able to text her and go, is this normal? Like I'm sitting here and I'm feeding, it's been 2 hours. Is this normal? I think that was one of the best, if not the best resources I had throughout my entire journey. So I think finding another breastfeeding mom that you can bounce ideas off. And that's why I keep my messages open on Instagram, because I want, you know, if you've got a question and you're not sure, like I'm there, I'm doing it. And just having a sounding board or someone to say, oh, look, that might be something you want to explore with someone else, you know, you might want to explore it with a health professional. But I think having someone who's there with you as a sounding board is so important, particularly someone who is an advocate for breastfeeding as well. We're so lucky in Australia that we have the ABA, so we've got the Australian Breastfeeding Association who are there. They've got a hotline. You can call them. If you're struggling, you can call them and they will give you advice over the phone. I think that is such an underutilized resource. Definitely. And it's there for a reason. They're there, they're the experts in breastfeeding. They're able to provide us with information as well. So don't forget they're there.
And that it's okay to ask if something is normal, because just because it's common doesn't mean that it's normal. And it's okay to, and what we're encouraging is asking the question and not feeling embarrassed to ask, because guaranteed the person you're asking probably has been there or knows somebody that's been there, and you'll actually feel better for knowing rather than feeling like you're alone and not having any idea what to do.
And no questions ever too silly. I still remember ringing up the ABA and asking, can I mix like my expressed breast milk with one I've got in the fridge? Like, do they need to be the same temperature? I don't know. So no questions ever too silly. Like, I think if you've never done it before, you don't know. So you only know what you know, and if you don't ask, you don't know as well. So,
and they've probably heard it all before. I'm sure there's probably not a question that you could ask them that they haven't heard at this point.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for all of that. That's been amazing, and hopefully that's helped some mums out there to not feel so alone and to feel more confident to breastfeed for as long as they want, and around feeding as their baby's ready for it, and to know that there is no actual time. There's no tick over on the wonder weeks that says this week you introduce food, because everybody is different. So thank you so much for that. Everybody can find you over on Instagram at Her Nourished, and also at Her Nourished Kids. So you do have a lot of focus around kids eating, not just for babies, but moving through the younger years as well.
So eating stages.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely a topic we'll have to talk about, because I think that that's something, it's crazy how much you can blitz up broccoli and feed it to an 8-month-old, and then all of a sudden when they're 2, they're like, oh, I don't eat broccoli. What is this? No, I don't eat the green ones. You're like, you just love the green ones.
Yeah.
They're like, no, you can call it a treat all you like, but I'm still not eating it.
Stop with your fancy plates. I'm not eating it.
That's right. We'll also pop all of your information over on the Hello Vagina website, and they will be able to get all the links to your socials and your programs. So thank you so much, Krissy, for coming on today.
Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Awesome. And we will catch up with all you lovely ladies soon. Have a great day. Thank you so much for joining another episode of the Hello Vagina podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. And if you have, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode and you're notified when a new episode comes out. Also, we would love for you to tap some stars for us and to leave a review so that others can see how much you enjoyed the podcast and what we're all about. So don't forget, hit that subscribe button. And until next time, stay beautiful.